One, and thank you so much for joining us at our fourth edition of our Pluribus Inclusion Insights free webinar series. So I am Isabelle Pujol. I'm the founder and CEO of Pluribus. Pluribus is a global diversity, equity, and inclusion consultancy. And for us, it's very important that we create a world where everyone belongs and can fully contribute. So for the last 20 years, we've been partnering with organizations to make inclusion real, whether it's through strategy, leadership, and honest dialogue. So over the last few months, we had the opportunity to already host 3 successful webinars, each time with a theme relevant to the current world context. So at the moment, there are so many conflicts, disruptions, mega change, uncertainty occurring globally. So leaning into the humanness of leadership is no more a choice, but really a necessity. So I'm very happy and honored to hand over to 4 inspiring speakers today to embark us on the importance of compassionate leadership. So Laura Berland and Evan Harrell, who are co-founders of the Center for Compassionate Leadership, and my 2 Pluribus friends and colleagues, Nicola Shearer and Daniel Stein. So really the virtual floor is yours.
I would think that most leaders here on this call today would think of themselves as being compassionate leaders, so believing in compassion. But what needs to, or what shifts when leaders move from believing that compassion is the right thing to do to leading for compassion? Can you say a little bit about the difference between leading with and leading for?
Yeah, we talked very directly about leading with compassion, which is about how you embody compassion on an individual level as a leader, how you treat people, and leading for compassion, which really takes compassion out into the organizational realm to create cultures of compassion, to create systems and routines and networks and roles that enable compassion to flow throughout the organization, just like we said before, kind of without taking lots of extra time, just sort of paying attention to what's possible and then creating these capacities for compassion to be present throughout the daily workflow of the organization. And it is transformative.
And exciting. It's exciting to think we can, we have at our fingertips the ability to lead for compassion, to actually see those roles, those routines, the networks in a different light, and how we kind of infuse organizations with compassion.
I agree. And when we speak to leaders and organizations about inclusion, we talk about consistency. We talk about the same with compassion. It's great to have a compassionate or inclusive intent. It's great to show up with some people creating that environment where they feel safe to speak up, where they feel like they matter, they can be their authentic selves. But how does that translate across all the contexts that you have influence? Maybe you don't lead people in those contexts formally, but you can certainly influence what happens in that culture, what gets said, what doesn't, what gets acknowledged. And I suppose back to what you were saying, Laura, about suffering, call it suffering, call it the challenges, the headwinds that we face in organizations. As leaders, we have that potential, we have that opportunity to specifically acknowledge that, to let people know we understand it, and to go further. And I think this is where belonging can really come through compassion, is that we let them know that they are meaningful, that what they have to contribute in the organization is meaningful, which doesn't just mean how we're going to get this decision made or how we're going to get this KPI met. It also means how we create change. How do we want to change the system? Because what you might be thinking as someone who's been here for 2 months and is 4 levels lower than me is just as important for the organization as what I might be thinking or seeing. So it's that meaningful voice and that meaningful contribution to change. We can move forward into, I know some people are here because they're really curious to know what some of the evidence for what we're speaking about is.
So before we jump into the evidence, I just want to make sure we stay anchored in the humanity. stay anchored in the human relationships.
Yeah. And as this world speeds up, as organizations are dealing with AI, and the tremendous speed of change, we tend to get more transactional. We think that that's more efficient, but in fact, just the opposite is true.
And I want to start here because I think that, again, this helps show the mechanism of why compassion works. Because what it shows clearly is that employees who experience compassion at work report a greater level of commitment. You respond, you give back what you're getting. There's a greater loyalty, and study after study shows significantly improved retention rates, employee retention rates. People experience less exhaustion, less burnout, and you can build this into the system, make the job work with less burnout. And then finally, people feel more accountable. People want to give, and they give more discretionary effort. The power of compassion is that the motivation that individuals respond with is intrinsic as opposed to extrinsic. They are responding because they are doing it by choice, which is always a much more productive reason. Why don't we go to the next slide?
That's huge, Evan, if you don't mind me just underlining what you've just said, because there are not many leaders out there listening to us today, or who wouldn't have been interested to come for whatever reason, who aren't thinking about discretionary effort, who aren't thinking about how do I kind of maintain or raise those levels of ownership, of accountability, as you said there. And often, let's face it, there's a fear we hear as well that we feel by focusing on the human, those standards might drop and might be compromised. So I think that's why this was an in-depth study. One of our colleagues was involved in it, I believe, and really showed that impact.
And why don't you go to the Deloitte study next, Daniel, which is the slide immediately after that. When you bring this form of human-centered leadership, what happens is the ability to make decisions faster unfolds. In our social architecture, and we'll go into this in a little bit more detail, there's a clear focus on networks, how you network so that information flows quickly, so it flows freely. We talked about the undamming earlier. People are more adaptable, they're more resilient. They're able to either change because the environment has changed or bounce back because something tough has happened. And then employees feel like their interests are being looked out for more greatly. In this Deloitte study, what they show is that the achievement of target financial goals was twice as good, and the likelihood of high performance was 3 times as strong as in the absence of the human-centered leadership. So it again flows, and it makes perfect sense. If you're respected, if you're treated well, if you're acknowledged for being the human you are, you're gonna be happier and more creative, and the safety that is created will lead towards faster information flow and more creativity.
Yeah, and you mentioned advocacy there. In a world, despite it feeling more transactional, we're relying on people in our organizations and our networks for spreading the good news about how we create value, what we're doing to impact the world out there as well. I think this study also showed, and it was a huge data set, as you can see there, conducted a few years ago, but showing that advocacy and commitment really strengthen that execution, the achievement of those targets, but also, I think we haven't got it written here, but retention as well, not surprisingly. People who felt able to do that and felt committed to their organizations, felt able to achieve. So perhaps, Evan, I wonder if I can bring in another layer of the human reality out there. We gave people 6 choices earlier on, and we discussed this. There were probably another 6 closely following that people had mentioned and that we hear all the time. Unless you wanted to go to the other study, I was curious just to hear overall here in terms of human experience, what many of us are facing at the moment, this the BANI context. We used to talk about VUCA, the volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous world. That's still out there, but the world as we know has shifted so fast now. And I'm going to bring a definition of what I'm talking about. You can see what I mean here, is that organizations and relationships even often feel much more brittle, like we can crack under the relentless pressure out there of change, of performance, the anxiety that many of you reflected in your questions, in your comments about this sense of being overloaded, not being able to keep up with the pace of change, with technology, the non-linearity, which means sometimes we just can't predict what's going to lead to what. A big strategy doesn't land flat. Some small incremental change can actually shift things for our stakeholders. And then we can probably identify with the incomprehensibility of how much is changing, what is so hard to predict out there. So my question back to you again here, perhaps to build on the studies, but to the reality we know and hear from our clients and the leaders we support is, in this context, in this environment, how is compassion particularly relevant? How does it support and help our colleagues dealing with this BANI world?
You know, Daniel, what just dropped in for me as you were sharing this definition about BANI, I'm feeling like this is a corporate nervous system gone off, gone wrong, gone off the tracks. You know, we have individual nervous systems, and we know as human-centered leaders that we need to be in a zone of relative ease to make effective decisions, to have our prefrontal cortex online, to do the hard decision making and to relate to other humans in ways that matter. But also, our organizations need to have that same sense of relative ease and calm and rationality and human connection, again, is at the core of all this. If I'm connected to someone, I'm not brittle, I'm not anxious, right? So by allowing the compassion to come through, we really change. Evan mentioned the waters that we swim in. You know, we change the vibration of the environment, the energetic sense where I can belong, where I can feel safe, where I can contribute in ways that are meaningful as opposed to in ways that really are broken, which is how most of us are struggling today in organizations.
Yeah, thank you.
Which I think takes us on to a kind of our next section about making compassion actionable. So, Laura, you painted a picture there of what it could be. So when compassion is working well in an organization, what do we actually see? What is different?
It's simply different. You see it. I mean, we have all been in different organizational environments, and you think, what makes this company different from that company? In the way people speak to each other, in the way meetings are planned, in the way information flows. All of this can be impacted through structured compassion in organizational environments. Laura speaks of the organizational nervous system. The whole nervous system is calmer, is more down-regulated. Of course, there's friction, but the way the friction is resolved is different. And in organizations, and we talked earlier about awareness, in organizations where there's friction, if we pretend there's no friction, that friction is just going to keep building up heat. If we notice the friction and say, okay, how can we bring something in here? Do we need to bring some graphite to try to put in there to lower the friction? All of this happens.
Yeah, and the superpowers here are really dignity and respect. You know, back to human fundamentals. You and I can solve a problem together if we're listening, if we're respectful, if we're hearing each other, if we're appreciating each other's perspective, we're taking perspective on where different people are coming from, and then we work together in a collaborative way to create a solution, not to ignore it. And that can speed up the process of change and agility and productivity and creativity and all the ivities that need to happen in an organization very directly.
Yeah.
I might just add something here, if I may, Nicola, because just hearing that also makes me think about some of the most challenging and tension-filled challenges we hear from our clients, whether that's about sharing or leading through change, or whether that's dealing with underperformance, often conversations which are very hard to have. And I suppose what I want to speak to here is in the way that compassion shows up here is that I think the leaders who really get this through and through are prepared to step into those conversations that feel difficult, that actually raise the prospect of, greater challenge than I realized was there to the surface. The level of clarity, transparency, the level of time as a leader I will put into making myself available to have that conversation and then be there to support the impacts of that conversation. So I think it was a subtitle on a colleague's book a while back, having the hard conversations in a human way. It's that sense of both and. We don't shy away from what's difficult, what needs to be surfaced, what needs to be dealt with, even if that means I'm telling you, you probably don't have a job in 6 months, but I'm going to make sure the way we do that, the way I encourage my colleagues to do that as well, really supports the human experience.
Mm.
I also want to share an example of, you mentioned earlier about when there's friction in an organization and it's pushed down in an organization and it will explode, it will out. And I was working with a leadership team recently, and when I first mentioned the word compassion to the team leader, they said, oh, we don't show our underbellies in this place, otherwise we'll get into trouble. And somebody also had popped in the chat about, what is it okay for a leader to show vulnerability? I held that thought as we went into a team offsite. And what happened was, as we went through, we created an environment where people were able to kind of, shake off their roles a little bit and kind of meet as a team, so not their primary roles. And what happened during the course of that day is one of the leaders got visibly upset because they felt in the quality assurance team that they were the brunt of all of the problems that were going on in this manufacturing site. And instead of kind of stepping over it, the leader, because we'd had this pre-compassion conversation, kind of noticed that there was suffering in the room. The quality assurance person was suffering. And instead of stepping over it, Devin, you mentioned earlier, noticing the friction and actually addressing it, the leader addressed it and asked, do you want to say more about what's going on? And that led to a conversation about how the team could alleviate the suffering that was happening in the quality assurance unit. And that team kind of came together to solve a problem. And afterwards, the head of the QA department felt that they were back belonging in the team. They weren't the dog that was being kind of kicked all the time.
Right.
So that was an example of a kind of a network coming together, and also people putting their roles aside in the face of a common suffering.
Mm.
The reality is we're all human and we're all going to do things that create problems and create challenges. How do we as leaders respond to it? And the easy thing is to blame people, to point fingers and the like. That really doesn't typically lead to motivation for change. That simply pushes down the challenges. It leads to denial. It leads to resistance. If you acknowledge and you create a culture where everyone can acknowledge that things have come up short, you actually bounce back, you learn from it, you grow. But that takes a focus and an intentional approach.
I heard a lot of growth in that story, Nicola.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes,
Thank you for that.
for them and for me witnessing it, from
Yeah.
going from we can't talk about compassion here to actually it being exposed in a room and they didn't shy away from it. So
Yeah.
you mentioned earlier about architecture, in terms of how we see compassion within organization, be it the roles, networks, routines, the culture. Want to say a little bit more about that?
Yes. Yes, because it's so foundational to the how, to making the invisible visible, to making the impossible possible. We utilize a framework from our colleagues Monica Warline and Jane Dutton at the University of Michigan Ross School of Business. They've published on this for years, and there's a foundational book I'm sure we can recommend for everyone in the follow-up notes. And this helps us look at the everyday elements that are happening within our organization and again, infuse more compassion into these various aspects. You name the roles, the routines, the networks, and the culture. And I think of these as like gears that we can start turning, levers that faucets that we can open to enable the flow of compassion. And it's not rocket science. We're all familiar with these elements in our organizational lives, but bringing the attention and the intention of compassion to structuring the ways that we work together slightly different, just small changes in the dials can make enormous impacts in organizations.
And as leaders, we have the opportunity to relook at those, when we think about compassion, uh, to analyze them from a perspective of, well, the way they are currently, are they actually enabling me and us as leaders, as people, to understand where the challenges, where the friction is, to better understand it, to be able to alleviate it? Simple example from a client I was speaking to recently who, as part of her department's way of getting things done, they had regular check-ins between the senior and the junior people in this department. The way these check-ins had happened so far had been quite informal. But what was noticed over time was that, well, we all know how hierarchy can show up in organizations. We also know how different personalities can show up. And what seemed true was that there seemed to be a good deal of top-down communication and expression of what was wanted or needed or desired by the leaders, but not much coming the other way. There seemed to be some kind of filter in terms of, what she heard from those senior leaders about what the junior people in that department were experiencing and doing. So she did something very simple. She connected with all of their leaders and suggested that they just brought a little bit more structure to their one-to-one interactions, that they've shared some questions in advance, that they actually took care to, and those questions were consistent and answered by both sides. So there was a sense by the end of the conversation that they were walking away with, where was there a lack of clarity, where was their challenge, where was there ambiguity, where was there a problem, and that as a result, over time, there was much more consistent output for her as a department head as to what needed the priorities in the system. So a very simple tweak there to something as simple as a regular update or interaction.
And this gets back to something we said earlier, which is that if you simply bring the intention to infuse compassion into different elements of your work, it comes in very naturally and very easy. You name a really simple routine. We have the head of a hospital here on Long Island who, when they are interviewing incoming potential residents, they ask them a question around compassion. And it simply has changed the quality of the incoming classes of residents such that they already understand who has the potential for compassion or not. And it's a simple routine that doesn't require more time. It just simply required the intention to say, we're going to create a compassionate world. We're going to create a compassionate environment, the water we're swimming in.
So Daniel, do you want to kick off with one of the questions that were asked in the pre-registration and give an answer?
Yes, and there was many that stood out. Perhaps I will bring one to Laura here, which named, well, some of the realities of the toxic workplaces that perhaps unfortunately many of us have either worked in or find in parts of the organizations that we're in. So speaking to what can we do to, well, in a way, to bring compassion into a workplace that feels cold, that doesn't feel oriented towards compassion.
Yeah. Which describes so many workplaces today. Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Unfortunately, this is increasingly common in our world. And one way we would think about this is to start with yourself, to work from the inside out, to sort of get a handle on how you are leading with compassion first. How are you greeting people? How are you treating people? Are you present and listening to your colleagues? Are you really showing up wholeheartedly with your own presence, with your own leadership capacity? It starts with that. And people will notice, even if they're not intending to notice. But if you are greeting people warmly, if you are receiving people warmly, if they feel a different resonance from you than they feel from the cold that is prevalent in the environment, that will spark something, because everyone feels this and wants this at their core. Everyone knows this is a profoundly missing element of our work environment today. And when they see a spark in you, they feel the spark, and that can turn on the spark in them. So maybe just the small shifts in your own behavior, in your own presence, in your own intention, and the way you're showing up for yourself and for your team can really spark the change.
Can I add to that also? Because sometimes a toxic environment, cold environment, is really lonely environment. And I'd encourage people, find an ally, find somebody with whom that, you can be genuine with, and you can say, share the common suffering. This hurts, this place hurts. So you find that, and then maybe between one of you or two of you or three of you, you start doing little things like, you have check-ins at your meetings. You agree that you won't interrupt each other when you are speaking. You let people finish their sentences. So it's almost like start where you're at, like you said, Laura, with your intention, with yourself, find an ally. It can be lonely work out there.
Yeah.
And the paradox of this is that in these cold environments, the hunger is even deeper. The need is even stronger. So while you may think it's harder to do it because the culture is resistant, it is easier to find the allies because everyone is hungry. And so you don't try to change everything all at once. You just try to change one relationship at a time. And what happens, and we've seen this happen, is that all of a sudden a team ends up being this island of light or island of warmth in a sea of cold, and then teams start noticing it. The ripple impact is very powerful.
Yeah, I could just briefly share a case at the European Commission where this started in a small and specific way within a team that started, bringing more compassion into their routines, into their roles, in how they dealt with other departments and the networks. And it has mushroomed, not immediately, over a period of years, to the point where the culture, the narrative, has really shifted from resilience under pressure, which is, I think, how many organizations roll today, to care as a leadership competence to ensure sustainable performance. And we know that's a huge organization with incredible commitments and needs and people to serve. But even within such a large, demanding structure, it's possible to start the ripples happening and to see it really make change and impact over time.
How do I lead in this consistent way to care for others? How do I bring that consistent care for others, that compassion, without having to sacrifice myself? I saw in the question someone mentioned something about vulnerability as well, and this idea that I'm going to expose myself in this process. There's risk attached, and frankly, from empathy and compassion, we know from studies and experience, it can fatigue, it can tire us. It can be very demanding. And one of the places I went to in my mind when thinking about that question, about that sense of self-sacrifice, is that in many organizations, I know there is a kind of badge of honor. There's a kind of hero mentality for saying, I'm going to be the one that puts my head above the parapet. I'm going to lead this change. I'm going to have these hard conversations. And what we know is if we're not balanced in how we try to lead this change, and if we don't look after ourselves, I think it's one of your mantras, Nicola, which is, I'll care for you, but in the same breath, I think of how I'm going to look after myself. So boundaries. What are my boundaries about how accessible I am, how much I'm able to contribute to this change, to serving my team through this hard period. I'm here to support you, but it's not infinite because my resource isn't infinite, and I'm also being measured on a whole load of other things that people are talking about, which are different from this conversation. So I'm sure you all have a few perspectives on this one, and there's a huge part of what we lead, the development we lead with compassion leaders around the science and the practice of self-compassion. I'm sure many people here are aware of that, which involves many different perspectives and mindsets and practices which can be helpful here.
Yeah, you can't give to someone else what you don't have yourself. And you always have to put your oxygen mask on first before you can help others. So
Yeah.
people who join us in the compassionate leadership training, you get to week 5 and people go, oh, it's self-compassion, isn't it? This is what I need to work on.
Yeah, and even around the idea of vulnerability has to be offered with care, or you will not. We do not just open ourselves up blindly. We only open ourselves up in ways that will promote connection and in ways that are safe. But we all underestimate how safe we are. We're typically much more fearful than we need to be. But it's not an unlimited element.
How can we spread compassion more widely through the business world?
We start with ourselves, and we we just keep building networks, building communities. We're here together doing this right now.
I just kind of think of it as kind of starting as a suffering detective. It's almost like we go looking because the suffering there. If you're sitting in a team or an organization saying, "What's suffering?" it means that as a leader you're not listening. So the first thing is to become a noticer of suffering, and that could be somebody giving a long sigh when they're asked to do a task. It could be somebody's messy desk. It could be somebody coming in late. It could all those kind of little signs that a usual high performer's not kind of on their game. So what's kind of going on there? So it's and then kind of looking, start small. Is it their role? Is there a lack of clarity? Is there too heavy a workload? Are they being asked to do routines, activities that are just life draining rather than value adding? Do they feel like they're kind of on the outer of the inner circle? Maybe they're feeling a bit of an outsider. Do they not, has their best friend left? Has there been redundancies or restructurings and suddenly they don't have a best friend at work anymore? So they don't feel part of the network. So these are all things that I think leaders can do to be that detective of suffering.
We wanted to offer you an opportunity to experience some of the practical impacts of focusing on human-centric, compassionate leadership. And this is an exciting new offering I'd like to share in partnership with Pluribus and the Center for Compassionate Leadership, which we'd like to make available to 3 organizations who have the capacity to consider this opportunity. And we're calling this a compassion lab because we're working with real world challenges. Imagine in your team or a leadership group that you're part of, where there are tensions around performance or capacity, around delivery, around change fatigue, and some of the pain points we've talked about in this session earlier on. And through a process that would last, either between 2 to 4 sessions over several months. So our team at Pluribus Center for Compassionate Leadership, we would guide you through a process that would enable you, to better understand and really to apply the framework that we've shared with you today, which is the framework for operationalizing compassion. How do you better interpret, understand, sense suffering or challenges where they're happening, and alleviate those through looking at the culture, the routines, the way roles are set up and enacted, and the networks and the connections we built. So we are happy to send you more about this. We're looking to work with 3 organizations this year through this Compassion Lab, and we can let you know more if you contact us. Our next Pluribus Insights, Inclusion Insights webinar will be in September. So please look out for information about that and the theme. We really want to thank all of you for your presence, for your participation, for your questions. Sorry we didn't get to all of them. We're really grateful. And above all to my dear colleagues, Laura, Evan, and Nicola, for this conversation today.
It's been
Thank
a
you,
pleasure.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.